Hi, everyone. This is Tori Vandelin from Prevent Connect. On this podcast, we are joined by Susan Sullivan and Mo Lewis of the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, and we're talking about all things Sexual Assault Awareness Month 2020, including diving deep into some of the resources that National Sexual Violence Resource Center has to offer for folks. Enjoy! So, Susan and Mo, thank you so much for joining us today on this podcast. Before we get into some of the content that we're going to talk about today, can you both introduce yourselves and your roles with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center?
Yeah, so my name is Susan Sullivan. I'm the Prevention Campaign Specialist for the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. This is my fifth SAAM campaign that I've taken the lead with, and really excited to talk about the IS campaign today.
And this is Mo Lewis. I'm the Prevention Specialist at NSVRC. I mainly work doing training and technical assistance with states and territories who get the rape prevention and education funding.
Great. Thank you both so much for joining us. The theme for Sexual Assault Awareness Month 2020 builds off and continues last year's theme, which is I Ask. So what inspired the National Sexual Violence Resource Center to continue the theme of I Ask? And what does I Ask mean?
So we're really focused on prevention. And since consent is such a clear example of what it takes to prevent sexual assault, it only made sense for us to develop a campaign that empowers everybody to put consent into practice. And so many folks from all over the country found the campaign useful in sharing those key messages about consent. And so we wanted to build on that foundation with this year's campaign and sort of explore the topic in new ways. So last year, we had those four key resources. We talked about consent. We talked about how power impacts consent. We talked about teaching age-appropriate lessons to children on consent. And then lastly, how to practice consent in online interactions. This year, we have a little bit more of a narrow focus. Our resources are really focused specifically on enthusiastic consent when it comes to sex. I Ask, which is our hashtag, and the shortened version of the theme is from the entire campaign theme, which is I Ask for Consent. And I really think that those two words, I Ask, share the key meaning of consent in a simple but hopefully memorable way.
So you had mentioned a bunch of the resources from Sexual Assault Awareness Month 2019 that I found super helpful. I know folks in the field found super helpful too. Can you give us an overview of the resources for Sexual Assault Awareness Month 2020 that people can find on NSVRC's website?
Yeah, so once again, for our SAM campaign, we have a physical toolkit that folks can order through our website. If you go to nsvrc.org/SAM, and that toolkit comes with a guide to planning events, walks you through different ideas for events, talks about other ways to get involved in April in the Sexual Assault Awareness Month campaign. It also comes with samples of our resources, a sample sticker, and it comes with a campaign poster and infographic. And so we still have some of those available. If you wanted immediately, you can download the campaign guide under the resources page on our website. And then in addition to that toolkit, we also have our resources. So the first resource is Your Consent Guide. And what it does is it walks readers through things to consider before, during, and after asking someone for consent. And it also provides clarity on how to respond if you're the one being asked for consent, and walks you through some of the ways to say no if you want to say no, or what to say if you're feeling unsure. And then the second resource we have this year is called We Can Stop Sexual Harassment, Assault, and Abuse Before They Happen. And this is just a really basic introduction to the idea of primary prevention.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Susan. And for our Prevent Connect listeners listening in right now, you can find links to everything that Susan just mentioned in the podcast post on our website. So, Susan, you had just started talking about your consent guide and We Can Stop Sexual Assault, Harassment, and Abuse Before They Happen. And Mo, I know that you were involved in developing the language and materials there. I'm wondering if you can tell us more about both of those resources and what they mean to prevention practitioners.
Yeah, I can tell you, we wanted to kind of bridge this gap that I think sometimes exists between people who do this for their work and people who are doing this as an individual person or a group or as activism or as volunteers. We know there's a lot of different audiences for SAAM and the SAAM materials. And so really with this document, we wanted to create something that would give more context about what primary prevention means. I think this is something that, we as practitioners are really steeped in, all these definitions and framings, but we really wanted to bring it to SAAM in a way so that anybody who is interested can have more information about it. And one interesting thing that I really like in this document is there's an example of how social norms around cigarette smoking have changed over the years, really because of the issue of secondhand smoke in particular. And so even though it's not like a perfect example that's exactly parallel to the issue of sexual assault, it does illustrate how widespread social norms around cigarette smoking have changed over the years, and then all the different ways that change can happen. Like, I remember going to restaurants years ago and being asked if I wanted to sit in the smoking or the non-smoking section, and this is just unheard of now. When I talk to people about this, they're like, what are you even talking about? So I think it can be really useful to look at similar widespread public health issues for examples to see how we can make this change happen. So hopefully that will be a resource that is good for that.
You talked about this a little bit, but I'm wondering if there were other resources that inspired the creation of We Can Stop Sexual Assault, Harassment, and Abuse Before They Happen, and how can folks involved in the work and folks involved in their communities put these talking points from this document into action?
I think a lot of different resources inspired this. I mean, primarily the social ecological model inspired this because it's such a key framework for this field and what we do. And it also really relates to anywhere else that people are doing this sort of public health or social change work. We really wanted to bring the social ecological model to the document in the examples because I think sometimes we can talk about it in theory, but having nice, clear examples can really help show people how this work can happen, including things like helping update policies about dress codes or student bill of rights. It's not as glamorous and fun as some of the other things that folks do for SAAM, but I do think that those types of things have the potential for lots of impact. And so I would hope that people would look at the talking points, look at the examples, and really just kind of be inspired to think outside of that box a little bit.
Yeah, I think that really rings true for a lot of folks. We can look at the social ecological model all day, but until we start seeing examples of how change happens at all the levels, it becomes more relatable in action that way. And I think folks really feel that way, especially when we are getting at those outer levels. Like, what does community level prevention look like? What does societal level prevention look like? And having these concrete examples like changing school dress codes, as you had mentioned, is a really great way for people to see how their work or their life or their activism plays into the different levels of primary prevention of sexual violence. Thanks for listening. Tune in to our next episode to learn more about how individuals, groups, and organizations can get involved in Sexual Assault Awareness Month 2020 and how folks can continue that momentum throughout the year.